Hey guys, today we are going to talk a little bit about language and delivery. So, basically how we give our speech, ways to make your speech a little bit more exciting for people listening, to make your speech more engaging. So, first, let's talk about delivery. Let's talk about some of the methods of delivery or the ways that you can give a speech. So, first is going to be reading from a manuscript. If you've ever been to a book reading, anything like that, then you've heard someone read from a manuscript. For this class, obviously, we're not doing that. I don't want you to write out a script and read it. Reading is bad. Don't read, except for note cards. Note cards are good. Reciting from memory. I also don't expect you guys to memorize your entire speech. I mean, these are speeches that are 4 to 6 minutes long. That's a lot of memorizing. And not only that, maybe not so much when you're doing these online speeches, but if you do have some speech anxiety, you get up there, you think you've memorized your speech, you look out, you see, 2 dozen people looking back at you, and you start getting really nervous. Everything that you thought you had memorized has just sort of gone out the window. So we don't want to memorize our speeches either. Impromptu speaking. If you were in one of my on-ground classes, we would actually do a little bit of impromptu speaking. So that's where basically I give you a topic or something like that, and you just have to get up and talk about it. You may or may not have any time to research it. If you're in class with me, you don't. But to me, that's what's fun about it. And then extemporaneous speaking. That's kind of what we're going to do for these speeches. I want you to think of these speeches as somewhere in between really formal and really informal. I don't want you to be super crazy formal, but I also don't want you to be really informal either. So what are those channels of delivery? So first, obviously, is going to be our voice. When we start talking about that, we need to think about several different things. The first one I want you to think about is your volume. For me, I can naturally be a little bit loud. So if I'm in a really small space, that's something I need to think about because I don't want to be too terribly loud. Whereas some people may be naturally soft-spoken. If that is you, I want you to really think about that and work hard on projecting a little bit more. Be just a little bit louder. Right. This is another thing I have to really work on. I can talk very fast, and I have to remind myself, hey, you're not auditioning to be an auctioneer. Slow it down. Inflection. So emphasis on words. This can really change the meaning of a sentence. It can also make someone think a little bit more. If I were to say, is he coming over tonight? Is he coming over tonight? What's another really, hear about rain. It's going to rain tomorrow. It's going to rain tomorrow. So rain tomorrow. Think about these words that you really want to put emphasis on. If you're asking a question, make sure that it comes out as a question. But at the same time, if you're stating something, make sure that you state it and it doesn't come across as sounding like a question. He got a new cat. He got a new cat? These are just some little silly examples. Basically, I chose cat because just a minute ago, one of my cats was by my hand. So cat. Now, tone. Tone can make or break your speech. If you've ever heard of Ben Stein, you know exactly what a monotone person sounds like. If you've not heard of Ben Stein, I'm sure you've all had that teacher at some point that was extremely monotone. Every single solitary thing they said sounded exactly the same, and there was really no difference. It didn't matter if they were excited or if they were sad. It was all just the same. Honestly, I don't do a very good job at monotone. because I tend to kind of change stuff up a lot. I'm a little dramatic, y'all, just a little. But make sure that you think about these vocal changes. If you're talking about something and you're excited, make sure it sounds like you're excited. If it's something kind of solemn, make sure it sounds solemn. Oh yeah, he totally broke his leg yesterday. Really? Oh yeah, he absolutely broke his leg yesterday. So also make sure that that tone kind of goes along with what we're talking about. You probably shouldn't be happy that someone broke their leg yesterday. Now, what about pitch? So it says here, you know, highness or lowness of your voice. Obviously, we can only do so much with that. If you have a really deep, booming bass voice, you're probably not going to ever be able to get it up super high. If you have a really high-pitched voice, you're never going to get it to be a booming bass voice. But you can still change things. It kind of goes with the broken leg thing. Oh, he totally broke his leg yesterday. Oh, he totally broke his leg yesterday. So the first time I was a little bit higher. The second time I was a little bit lower. So obviously higher pitches tend to make you think of stuff that's a little bit happier, a little bit more jovial, maybe a little bit funnier. Whereas those deeper basses make you think of something more serious. So make sure you work on that. Articulation. This one I also like to say you can kind of think of with rate also. The faster you speak, the less articulate you're probably going to be. But we want to make sure that when we are speaking, when it comes to public speaking, that we are articulating our words, that we are making sure that there is enough space between our words. We're not running them all together. Now, pauses and silence. These can be great when used appropriately. They can really suck when not used appropriately. So when we're pausing for emphasis or focus, it says right here, don't overuse it. Don't pause every 30 seconds in your speech. See, that gets a little awkward, and just think that was a very tiny amount of time that I paused for. Times that you do want to pause. If you've given your audience something you want them to think about, maybe you've given them a statistic or a big number, or you've even asked a question, and you want them to have a moment to really absorb what you said. Give a slight pause for them to think about it and to absorb. The same goes for silence. A lot of times if you ask your audience a question, you might want to give just a little bit of silence for them to really think about the answer to that question. But again, don't overuse it and make sure there is a purpose behind it, because pauses without purpose just start to feel really awkward. The other thing with pauses, if you lose your train of thought, because we all do, put a pause in there instead of an or an Pauses are okay. And not so much. So body language. We all know that what comes out of our mouth isn't the only form of communication. Body language is huge. Even now with this, I'm sure you all see my hands moving around. You would see it even more if we were in person. But body language is so important. Body language, of course, is not just the way you move. It's not just the relationship between your verbal and your nonverbal, but it's going to be your eye contact. With the computer, it's a little bit more complicated. Being recorded, it's a little bit more complicated than with an audience. But when you have an actual audience, you want to make sure you're making eye contact with them. It brings them in. When your audience feels like you care, and when it feels like you're trying to connect with them, they're going to want to connect back with you. Once you've connected, now they're going to want to listen to you. And what's the point behind giving a speech? To have your audience listen. Even with the computer, eye contact can still be really important. Obviously, if I'm looking over here, you guys can still see, even in that tiny little box, that I'm looking over here. Or if I'm looking right at that little box, well, it's kind of obvious that I'm not looking at you guys. So make sure you're working with that posture. Posture can tell your audience whether you are confident or not confident. If you come out and you are slouched over and you're kind of humped, that doesn't really scream a lot of confidence. Obviously, when we're talking about being online, it is a little bit more difficult to tell exactly what someone's posture is versus in person. But do remember, this class isn't just about giving your speeches online, it's also about learning how to give your speeches in real life, in person. Movement. So movement is another thing. It can be great or it can be overused a little bit. You don't want to be crazy and going every which way and constantly, making your audience like get whiplash because you're moving around so much. But there's nothing wrong with moving back and forth, especially if you're in a bigger area. That way you can make eye contact with everyone in your audience without having to physically turn your head constantly. So that is it that's going to be it for this PowerPoint. If you guys want to go back and look at the PowerPoint again, with all the PowerPoints, you can find it in the content section. Feel free to go back over it as much as you want. If you have any questions, please make sure you email them to me so we can get whatever you don't understand straightened out. And I will talk to you guys later.